Hello everyone and welcome back to another one of these mid-Railfanning videos. In this video we're going to be covering part 1 of the trains that I filmed over summer of 2025. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get right into the action. The first outing we're going to cover is when I saw 4 trains in Rose Hill, all of them being solid GE sets. I'm skipping 2 of them because the shots sucked, so here's the other 2. The first of these 2 is just a GEVO quartet, but I learned quickly what happens when you go railfanning with non-rail fans.
Can I leave a penny on the track?
We did that last time.
Wait, is the train coming?
Yo, that's a big train, man.
After this train and one other train cleared, for some inexplicable reason, the non-railfan friends that I was with went to a gas station, and they took my tripods with them. I don't know why they did this, but they did. And then a train came. The H-Gal bar was approaching fast and I didn't know what to do, so I stuck my phone in a tree and called it good. Anyways, here's the shot. 4 days later, on May 25th, I headed back out trackside because I heard that SP6379 was going to be on the MFWWT with a T4 Ace trailing as well. What I didn't expect were the 3 extra trailing units that were added in Enid, Oklahoma, and the lead unit being in a rather interesting paint scheme. Anyways, roll clip. I was gonna go home after it cleared, but a friend of mine showed up and told me there was a Red Rock coal coming, so I decided to stick around for a little bit longer. Two days later, on the 27th, I heard that BN 1935 was in charge of Local 9 running late eastbound, so I decided to head up to North Junction to try to find it. When I got there, the WTA Local was doing WTA Local things, and I got to watch them switch for about an hour or so before Local 9 came. Or so I thought. WTA local was done WTA localing, this Phoenix to Chicago intermodal came by, going about as fast as trains go between Argentina and Augusta when they're cool. The next train was just pure confusion. It was the M Nunu, which had picked up Local 9's consist on the hump and swapped power with Local 9, which meant that 1935 was no longer leading and I was treated to a pair of Jeeps. Oh well, whatever. After this train went by, I made my way up to the BNSF Wichita yard to see if 1935 was there. I then headed over to check out the UP side of things, where I found the MFWWT with its standard fare of Gevo Duo. I guess that day was my lucky day, because I then found SP6379 sitting on the Klein Yard Spur. I was not expecting to find this unit at all, so it was a neat treat to see again. The following Friday, I headed out with two goals in mind: 1935 on westbound Local 9, although trailing, and a former Susquehanna SD40 on the UP MWTFW. After getting stopped by a Local 9 building at 21st Street, I drove past them, then headed to wait them out at 17th Street. Here I was greeted by a BNSF employee who promptly asked me to leave. I left and went to the UP side. When I got to the UP side, I found the power for the WTFW shuffling around the yard as they prepared to build their train. After getting this clip of the SD60 leading, I headed over to wait out the train. The next day, upon request of my friend Rail Hunter Productions from Kansas City, I headed to the Augusta Depot to see what I could catch. We didn't see a whole lot of interest, so I'll just show the minimal highlights. The first train we saw of interest was an H1-9. Next, I got this awesome shot of the H-bar gal passing the Augusta Depot. The next cool thing that happened was this Mega S intermodal being led by a 4900 Series -9 with a KCS AC44 trailing second, and a Canadian Pacific motor in the middle of the train, but who cares about that? The last train we saw before heading home was the ZLACWSB with a fake bonnet trailing last, which is 4718, and I've actually seen this one a couple of times before. Just under a week later, I headed trackside in search of a Canadian National run-through grain train with a Canada Cab -9 trailing and a P5 on the lead SD40M-2. So imagine my surprise when I pulled up to my spot and saw it sitting there. I didn't even have time to be excited because the Z Stow WSP was rounding the curve fast. Crew of the grain train then turned on their headlights, but the Z SPD WSP was coming in hot, so I switched sides of the track so that I wouldn't get blocked. That was a good move. Next up was this westbound autorack train. Next was a Chicago to Phoenix intermodal with a Ferromex Ace on it. To end off this awesome evening, I caught the ZALT WSP with an AC44 C4M trailing heading east into the night. My next outing was on June 9th. I had missed CSX 3194 early in the morning, but I heard that a mythical Lashup involving a CSX leader, an H2 Gevo, and a Ferromex primer was headed my way, so I decided to go to Rose Hill to catch them. After a 2-hour wait with nothing, I finally caught my first train, the QLAC NSA, heading east with an NS AC44C6M third out. The QLPC lac that I was waiting on had actually pulled up to the crossing east of me and stopped to wait on this train to pass. After this train cleared, the LPC LAC throttled up and passed me. few days later, I had a bit of deja vu as I would miss 3194 again. However, I caught a loaded grain train with an ace leader and a ZWSP PHX led by 6706 Reel. Well, it's really hard to see, but look what's in there. It's 1935 again. Yeah, I just can't catch a break. My next outing would take me to Wichita in search of BNSF 2788 and UP 8388. While I was looking at 1935 and complaining, a BNSF grain train spawned out of nowhere. It had an H2 Gevo leader though, to piss off Cohen Oinky trains, and the lighting was pretty good, and the clouds were pretty neat, so it was pretty cool. My next sketch would be 8388. Man, I hate this unit. At least I got it over with so I never have to see it again. A few days later, I was making my rounds in Wichita and I got absolutely jump scared by the UP Pepsi local. At least I had 1085 lading today. The Saturday after my Wichita gallivanting, I headed to Mulvane to look for Local 9 with a mythical Lashup including 1648 leading and 1935 trailing, and CSX 3194. I would start the day looking for Local 9 along Southeast Boulevard. However, I would miss the turn into the spot that I was heading to, leading to me getting absolutely jump scared by the train at Pawnee, leading to an impromptu chase where I only took pictures and videos as I was driving alongside the train. Please note that I was not driving unsafely, and that all of these shots were taken with care, either while stopped at a traffic signal or not paying attention to the train and paying attention to the road. After catching Local 9, I began my way to Mulvane, passing this grain train on the way there. Geez, sometimes it feels like you can't have a Transcon Saturday without a bar gal. The first train I caught at Mulvane was the bar gal rounding the curve into town with 2 GEVOs for power. I then relocated slightly west of town, where I didn't even have time to fully set up before this westbound grain train came out of nowhere with a Ferromex Ace trailing. The only train I caught before relocating back to town was the Z-SPD Chai. My next train would be the Q Stow Chai that was supposed to have 3194 trailing, I think it was second on the head end, but I guess BNSF decided that 3194 did not need to go to me because, well, it wasn't on the train. As it would turn out, it had been pulled off in Black, Texas and would come through Wichita about 2 days later. And of course, I didn't catch it. Oh well, maybe next time. The next day, a friend of mine invited me to Wichita for his birthday party. We saw 5 trains. The first of these was the HCDT Gal being led by a H2-9 duo. Next was the K&O transfer to the BNSF, with literally the 2 most boring units on the whole K&O. Next was the MWTFW that nobody was ready for, with a squeaky clean C6M on the front and a pink Halliburton breast cancer awareness hopper in the middle of the train. Next up was K&O heading home. The last train before I headed home for the night was the UP LVB60 with an SD40 end leader. Here, have this intermodal that I captured later that week. The next and final outing for this video is a very special one. I made my way up to Harrington on June 27th to meet up with my friend CXMX for his birthday. We had both found out that UP 6706, the last CNW patched unit active on UP's roster, was leading the ZLCG2, and we both really wanted to see this thing. I'd been wanting to see 6706 leading again ever since I got my Canon Rebel T7, and this was my chance. I made my way up to Harrington as fast as I could to get there in time and meet up with CXMX to maximize our time together and see this train. As awesome as it was to see this locomotive, it was also sort of bittersweet knowing that there's a potential that I'll never have the chance to see this thing leading again. However, time will tell, and nobody can know for sure, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the action. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to see more content just like this. See you guys in the next one.